said, when I originally looked at the pilot tools, it was very clear the running costs. And as we know, small homes, small efficient homes are obviously going to use a lot less energy than a big efficient home of the same efficiency per square meter. And in the software itself, it still does break down the costs. Unfortunately, on the report, at least the report that I've seen so far, they've got the costs there, but they just give you a pie graph and they split up that pie graph into where the energy is going into which major appliance in the home, but they don't give you an overall total for the pie graph. So it does give you some idea, okay, this appliance is probably going to use more energy than this appliance of the total budget, but doesn't tell you what that predicted total budget is. I would probably be asking the thermal assessor just to have a quick look at it on the screen and see what they can tell you on that.
Now, can you talk through with us how this change to the scheme and the whole of house rating is going to impact the small houses versus big houses? Because previously, I think that it's small houses have not necessarily been celebrated the way that they should through the way the energy efficiency modelling sort of worked. So what does this change mean in terms of the actual house size itself?
So, like I said, when I originally looked at the pilot tools, it was very clear the running costs. And as we know, small homes, small efficient homes are obviously going to use a lot less energy than a big efficient home of the same efficiency per square meter. And in the software itself, it still does break down the costs. Unfortunately, on the report, at least the report that I've seen so far, they've got the costs there, but they just give you a pie graph and they split up that pie graph into where the energy is going into which major appliance in the home, but they don't give you an overall total for the pie graph. So it does give you some idea, okay, this appliance is probably going to use more energy than this appliance of the total budget, but doesn't tell you what that predicted total budget is. I would probably be asking the thermal assessor just to have a quick look at it on the screen and see what they can tell you on that. The good thing of one thing that does give you though on the assessment, it will give you how much carbon dioxide the house produces, and it will give it for or is responsible for, let's say, because it's not produced necessarily at the house, it's produced in the power plant where you buy the electricity from. That's if you're on electricity. It is produced at the house if you're burning gas. Yeah. What was I saying? No, I've lost my train of thought now. Giving that little clarification.
You were talking through what was at the bottom of the report in terms of the pie chart, and then in terms of
yes. Okay, so it gives you how much carbon dioxide your house is responsible for with solar and also without solar. So it's quite. If you compared a small house versus a big house, you'd be able to look at the how much without just say let's take the solar out of it, and you can straight away see, well, how much carbon dioxide is this house versus this house. So there is a bit of comparison going on there. And like I said, in the calculation engine, they do look at the size of the house when they're working out how much appliance load there is or how many showers are being taken. So small houses typically have fewer people, and so they do get a benefit. So they're getting more benefit than they used to just with the house energy rating, the star rating report. Now whole of house will give them a little bit more of a leg up, perhaps. It's not it's still not looking at it. Once we get into embodied carbon, that's when they'll get a huge leg up, or it'll become immediately obvious what we already all know, that smaller homes obviously use less resources.
I can imagine though, if you're a couple who are just two people living in a house that's quite large, then you'll be penalised because the modelling will be assuming that there might be 4 or 5 people living in that house and all of the energy use that comes with that. So it's going to be quite interesting to balance that, isn't it?
That's it, and that's the downside of a generic a tool that has to put in generic assumptions because they're trying to rate all homes against the same standard. Yeah, and unfortunately, you can't fiddle with the knobs in that part of it.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting to see. So, and I think that the more that homeowners dive into the data and understand how the modeling happens, the more then they'll have knowledge that can help them make better decisions. So now there's been changes in the code in regards to thermal bridging and also ventilation, and then in certain climates, underslab insulation. Can you just talk a little bit about that and just help homeowners understand a bit more?
So this is mostly, well, let's start with one that I posted about not too long ago in Builders Declare, which was the underslab insulation. And this is just for Victoria. It's not such an imminent issue now that it's been pushed back till next May is when Victoria is bringing in the upgrades to the code. But in climate zones 6, 7, and 8, which are the cold climate zones, and Victoria is typically 5, 6 or 7. So it covers a lot of Victoria. If you're building a waffle slab, and by the way, there are obviously other states that have the same climate zones, but only Victoria at the moment have signed up to this part of the code, I believe. If you're not building a waffle slab, and most slab on grounds in Victoria are in fact waffle slabs, but if you're not building a waffle slab, you have to, by the code, and this is beyond the energy rating, not really to do with the energy ratings, deemed to satisfy requirement, you have to put insulation under the slab to a level of R0.64 that just happens to be almost exactly the same as what the waffle slab insulation works out to.
It's convenient, isn't it?
And you also have to put on R0.64 slab edge insulation as well. Now, if you're doing a waffle slab, for some reason, they don't require you to put on slab edge insulation, but if you're doing a raft slab, you will be required to do it unless this rule changes. So I have some slight I've got a lot of clarifications that I'm requesting being made about this particular rule.
It's an interesting one, isn't it?
It needs a lot of detail for builders because builders need to know how to actually build this. And it's talking about an R0.64, which is only narrow. That's only like 20 mil of polystyrene insulation. But does that go completely under the slab? Engineers don't necessarily like it always going completely underneath the slab because they want the concrete to go down to founding depth and they don't want something compressible in between. Okay, so if it doesn't if it's allowed to miss those founding beam areas and just sort of sit on the slab pads on your raft slab, well, now it's intermittent insulation and you've got thermal bridging. So if you have to maintain a consistent R0.64, that insulation that sits on top of the slab needs to be very thick to actually achieve it. In fact, it needs to get to sort of waffle pod sort of thickness. And you end up, I may as well do a waffle pod.
Yeah, I'm sensing a theme here.
Yeah.
Do you think this is the one gift they gave back project home builders or something like that?
Look, I think this is maybe. I think this is. I think it's come from I don't know the history behind it, so I might be completely wrong. But I think it's come from a good place in that it's recognised that in cooler climates, in winter, it's good to have a bit of insulation under the slab just because the sunlight's coming into your home. Great, it's falling on a concrete slab. If you've got a concrete slab, great. But concrete is quite conductive, and if your soil temperature is quite cool, it can leach away reasonably quickly. So a little bit of insulation in that instance slows it down and keeps it within the house for longer. So yeah, that can be a good thing. Also, CSIRO brought out or post about a year ago now, saying that if you've got moisture under the slab, if you have groundwater, even 5 meters below, that affects the moisture levels of the soil. And so you will actually lose heat out of your slab a lot quicker, and it can have half a star effect on your home. So again, a bit of insulation is a good idea in between. So I think that's sort of where it's come out from. But like many things in the code, they say something, but they don't give enough detailed specification showing you nice pictures of how to implement. And
It's almost like you need the National Construction Code, and then you need like a diagrammatic how to execute the National Construction Code book that goes with
yeah,
it. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, they used to have something similar for design, and the minister's guidelines that sort of give you a bit more idea of how to, how to implement the res code back in the old days. But yeah,
Yeah.
something like that would be good.
Thermal
Ventilation.
bridging and ventilation.
Yeah,
Yep.
yep. Okay. Ventilation on well, thermal bridging, I guess, since we're talking about heat flow, it was recognized, well, it's been recognized for a long time that NatHERS does not include thermal bridging, and that thermal bridging can be have a big effect on the star rating, particularly in the case of steel frames versus timber frames. And steel is around about 1,000 times more conductive than softwood, 500 times more conductive than hardwood. So it's a very conductive thing. And now if you've got plasterboard directly on the inside of a steel frame, and you've got your cladding direct fix on the outside of the steel frame, if you put insulation in between, that insulation will work, but the heat will flow around the outside, and you'll get lots of thermal bridging, and potentially you'll get cold lines on your walls, and maybe even condensation forming where the plasterwork is touching the steel. And so this can actually change the rating. They did some testing on this. NatHERS modeled it. It can decrease the actual performance versus the on paper rating by 0.7 to 1.2 stars. So a reasonable amount. And so in the code, there's been for a while a requirement for steel frames to have R0.2 insulation stuck on the outside of them, which is either a 12 mil polystyrene or a 20 millimeter timber batten. Both of those will have R0.2. But the NatHERS software now has a new module that is added all about thermal bridging. And the idea here is to take it, that you also get thermal bridging through timber, right? All materials thermal bridge to a certain extent. And unless you just built your house with just the one insulation material, then you'd get, it would all be consistent. But when you got different materials in the house, they all have slightly different insulation levels. You will get thermal bridging. And timber, even though it's quite a good resistor, at least compared to steel, compared to your insulation, it's not as good. So your insulation bat might be R2.5, timber, a 90 millimeter timber is 0.9, R0.9. You get 0.1 for every 10 millimeters of timber, as far as an R rating goes. So what they've decided in their wisdom is to work in this software module so that you do what is necessary to bring the home up to the same performance as timber frame, so that it sort of just keeps them comparable. But it hasn't also gone the next step and said, okay, we want to do something about the thermal bridging through timber frame. It's just trying to equate steel and timber, because steel was a particular issue that the building code was aware of. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So
And
that's sort of where that is.
you are just a steel trap for data. The way you can remember numbers and things like that, it always blows my mind. So, in terms of the ventilation?
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a tricky one. I'm still getting my head around what I'm going to do, but come May next year, if you are in climate zones 6, 7, and 8 against the cold zones, what they're worried about is condensation. And the worry is that condensation through standard construction can make its way through holes in light fittings and things. Sorry, condensation. Moisture inside your house, when you're breathing, you're showering, you're cooking, it builds up moisture inside the house. That moisture can make its way to the roof space, and at some stage it's going to meet a cold surface eventually, or a cooler surface, condense down. As the air gets cool, the water condenses out of it and can cause dripping and potential mold and issues and rot in your roof. And so they're wanting to provide enough ventilation, so you've got an air pathway to hopefully carry that moist, humid air away before it condenses out. And if you've got, you've got some moving air, it can do that. If there's no moving air, then it doesn't really matter, even if you've got holes on both sides. If the conditions are all still outside, and you do get a little bit of siphoning with just the stack effect. But I won't go into that. But the rule is, what they're wanting you to do is they're wanting you to put vents along the eaves and vents along the ridge, and to have a pathway for air to travel from the ridge across the top of the insulation and then out. Now, it needs to be under, if you're going to put foil on your roof, it needs to be on the underside of the foil, because the foil stops any moist air continuing on. So there's no point putting ventilation above the foil. So if you're using, say, a foil back blanket, this ventilation pathway would go in your eave, up through your attic space, if you've got an attic space, up to the ridge, and then it would go out at the ridge. Or you can follow the typical sort of passive house idea of not using foil, using a breathable membrane over the top, and a breathable membrane will usually let the moist air come through. And then in that case, you would typically have a breeze path above the rafter. You'd have a rafter, you'd have a counter batten that runs along the same line as the rafter, and then your roof batten's running perpendicular over the top of that, and it just allows a 20 millimeter gap for that air to flow in and out. The trick is that you need a lot of ventilation by the code, and it can be as much as a 25 millimeter gap running the whole way down the eave and the whole way along the ridge.
Wow.
Yeah, which is now it doesn't have to be running the whole, it can be, say, the same area, but in, say, circles between each rafter, which would look really weird. Well, yeah, so anyway, it's what they call 25,000 millimeters per meter. That's how much you need, and that is 25 millimeters high by 1 meter long gives you that 25,000 millimeters, and
Right.
every meter you have to have the same amount. Now, if you have a steeper pitch roof, you can get away with a little bit less, because this stack effect that I was talking of, hot air wants to rise, so it does suction its way through a little bit more. But at the moment, there's no real detail as to how for builders to achieve this. I've been talking with my guys at the moment, putting in like a fly wire mesh all the way down along the eaves, where we're going to need to cut the eave sheet. We're going to need to block on either side of that to support it and hold it, and that's all the way around the house. Then you go to the top, and they're starting to come out with products for the ridge cap that allow air to come out, but close it off with sort of a fly mesh to stop little critters and things coming in. But it's not cheap.
Yeah.
And I got my plumber to quote on it for the last job was another $11,000 to put in this special ridge capping over a house. Yeah, not cheap. So
Yep.
I'm sure that there's going to be other solutions coming out, but that's one for builders to maybe start to look at the code and to think about how they're going to apply it. The other thing that's going to be really tricky, and again, the National Construction Code doesn't give any direction. What if you've got a box gutter going to a box gutter, that sort of classic, very low pitch roof? How do you get your ventilation pathways in there? So
Yeah.
some
Yep.
interesting
That's going to be
times
really
ahead.
interesting to see how that gets flagged out. So I think for homeowners whose brains might be spinning at the moment, it's a case of just really opening the conversation with your team to know that this is even on their radar, let alone the fact that they're trying to work out solutions to it, because the risk lives in the professional team's ability to execute it according to the code. And so they need to actually understand that, as a homeowner, you need to know that they're looking at the code, that they're understanding these changes have occurred, and what they're doing to kind of try and upskill themselves on it. Because I can imagine that there's lots of builders out there who aren't even aware that change exists.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
been, and look, that's one of the reasons that things were delayed in Victoria. Is there's just a lot of uncertainty around a number of things that are coming in. And there's sort of a bit of an overload for people. I'm just hopeful that, well, what I don't want to see is come next May, all the same arguments get pulled out again to push it back, instead of actually dealing with it and thinking about it and sorting it out.
Just kicking the can down the road. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the True Zero Carbon Challenge earlier. You are working with Melbourne University and you've created a tool to work with their EPIC database for the competition. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what's involved? And because it's really exciting.
It is very
what you're up to.
exciting.
Yeah.
And actually, I hope one of these days, just to mention Builders Declare again, Sustainable Builders Alliance, we're bringing out a website, the Sustainable Builders Alliance website. Eventually, this tool is going to get on there. So what happened? Well, this year we decided to. I was given the task, in fact, of finding an embodied carbon calculator that is works really well, worked well for residential. So the one we used last year was great, but it was more of a commercial focus. And I looked around. There are some
What did
out
you use
there.
last year?
The footprint calculator.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So I recommend, the footprint calculator. It's a robust tool, but yeah, you just need to, if you're doing a residential home, it's not that easy to sort of set up for big sky rises and that sort of thing. Oh, that's what I found. Anyway, so I was given the task and I looked through all the tools that are available in Australia, and I couldn't find any that were complete enough to give a full enough score. A lot of them sort of dumbed down certain things or included some things, but not others. I looked here and I looked over in New Zealand as well. And I kept coming back to the free EPIC database tool that Melbourne University put out. And the only issue with this tool, it's fantastic, but it just gives things like, how much carbon is in a kilogram of brick. And while that's great, it's not immediately easy to interact with it from a construction point of view. There's a lot of sums that you have to work out, and not many people are going to do that. Anyway, wondering what I would do because the deadline for the start of this competition was coming up. I went for a run, as I often do, to clear my head. And as luck would have it, the hound from hell found me, and I got attacked by a dog.
Oh,
and
really?
The dog jumped up and it bit my bicep. And
Yeah.
before I knew it, I had blood streaming down my arm, and I found myself having to go to the hospital for a tetanus shot. And they said, "Oh no, that's not good enough. You're going to have to go to hospital and be checked out by surgeons."
Wow.
I didn't know that dog bites were so terrible. So I was in the hospital for 2 days, feeling pretty good. They'd strapped it up, but just waiting around. So what do you do in that situation? Well, you call your beautiful wife to bring in your computer, and you open up Excel and create a spreadsheet that works with the EPIC database.
I love it. The
And
universe heard you saying,
yeah,
"I need to
yeah,
find a tool,"
I
and
think
so
so.
it sent you a
I
dog
think
to
so.
flatten you on a bed for 2 days so you could work it out yourself.
That's right. And all of a sudden, in my busy lifestyle, I suddenly had time. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, now I've got a tool, and the difference is that this interface, if you like, it uses all the data from the EPIC database, but it just creates assemblies. So it'd be 1 square meter of brick veneer wall, 1 square meter of plasterboard, and you can put in different types of insulation. It's very flexible. You just swap things in and out of the assembly. Tilt up panel, AAC, veneer, anything I could think of, screw piles, strip footings, slab footings, everything. So it's being test run this year in the True Zero Carbon Challenge. And so the entrance there, we've created some training modules in that, and they will hopefully find any bugs in it, or if there's any other materials that need to be put in. Robert Crawford, who's the one of the lead creator of the EPIC database, is working with us. So that'll be his job to, if there are any tricky materials, to work out the coefficients, the carbon coefficients for those. And hopefully at the end of the year, we'll have a tool that's reasonably robust that anyone can potentially use. As long, like it isn't. I'm not a computer whiz. I am okay at Excel because I have been costing up homes for a long time, and I know how to do copy and paste. So if you can do copy and paste in Excel, you'll be able to use this spreadsheet tool. Yeah.
It sounds fantastic. Oh, I can't wait to be able to have a play with it. So, yeah, let us know when that's obviously Sustainable Builders Alliance will be able to include that on the website. And I was chatting to Brian Guinan yesterday about Sustainable Builders Alliance and sort of the timelines and things like that. So really looking forward to being able to share that with the Undercover Architect community when you guys have the website up and running. So
super exciting our end. And yes, a cadre of sustainable builders have been putting this together and putting their effort into it. So yes, it'll be hitting the hitting the internet soon, I guess.
And you were talking also about your net zero home course that you did with Design Matters National and the South Australian government. So that's actually available now for people to be able to access, is it?
Yes, it is. Oh, I should just say, just to finish with the True Zero Carbon challenge, the True Zero Carbon challenge is still taking entries. One of the problems with the challenge, we really want the assessors to use the new tools this year. So, and the tools were supposed to be out in May. Now it's looking like September. So we've sort of extended things, and we're probably going to relaunch it a little bit later, because from our association's point of view, we want our members to start using and working and experimenting with these tools. So if you haven't entered yet, there's still time. There's prize money. Anyone who does actually complete the challenge, you get like a little digital logo that you can use in your marketing to show that you have the wherewithal and you understand how to create a net zero home. So yeah, it's a good little bit of marketing to have to
fantastic
set you apart from your peers. Put it that way. Now the last one, the net zero home builders course, which as I said, I don't use any highfalutin words in it, so anyone should be able to access this. There's a lot of design content. It's got 5 modules. The first one, as I said before, is high performance design and the rules of passive solar design, how to ace 7 stars, really is what that one's about. The second one looks at how to build to perform on the ground to your NatHERS rating and what you need to do. It also discusses that checklist and goes through all the points of that checklist so that builders can understand what each one of the steps means. The third module looks at risks that can be associated with high performance construction around indoor air quality and condensation and owner expectation. The fourth module looks at appliances and how to specify energy efficient appliances. And the last module looks at embodied carbon, gives you embodied carbon 101, so you understand all that, but also what the tools are out there if you want to calculate it, and then potentially how you would offset that if you wanted to go full hog into a true zero carbon house. So yes, I will leave the contact details with you, Emily.
That sounds amazing. What an incredible resource.
I hope so. I put a lot of blood and sweat into that particular resource.
Do you sleep? I don't know how you fit this all in. Just, that'll be an amazing resource for everyone to access. So definitely look forward to being able to share that with the Undercover Architect community, because I know homeowners would very happily watch through the building modules as well to see, okay, how am I going to know? How am I going to help? How am I going to communicate what I want to my builder? And how am I going to know that they're actually doing it? So that will be really fantastic. And so before we wrap up, I just wanted to, we talked a little bit about Sustainable Builders Alliance. So Brian's interview is going to be later in the season about the National Construction Code. So you get the opportunity to tell listeners a little bit about the Sustainable Builders Alliance and the incredible website that you're pulling together and what it's going to mean for the industry and for anybody basically who wants to access this resource online. Because you, as the person behind the Builders Declare social media account, and the amount of education that you put out on that is incredible. I was saying to Brian yesterday, if the website is, I can just see the website being that on steroids. So in terms of how it's going to work. So you just want to tell us before we wrap up just
Thank
a little
you.
bit
Thank
about
you
that?
very much for the opportunity. Yes, the website is, if you've seen our Facebook or our Instagram, it's basically getting a lot of that information, but just ordering it in a logical sequence, to put in what we're calling it is a roadmap to net zero home. So if you want to have a net zero home, it'll have all the information there of the practical information, what you actually have to do. So yeah, that's what is coming in the website. It's also the hub for all of our webinars and our podcasts and events that are going to be coming up, and how to get in contact with us. We're hopefully also going to have how-to sheets on there, how to do a building wrap to a window connection, or how to remove a chimney, or how to block up the air vent at the top of a wall, and and why should you and when you shouldn't, that sort of thing. So simple information that you can download off there. Now, I think your listeners probably understand who Builders Declare are, but what we're trying to do is close the gap in the industry. We've got architects and designers who have, over the last, forever really, have been talking about building design. Some more than others, but at least they've had the education and the exposure to high performance. The building end is builders go through a course and they're never really taught. In your standard course, they're never taught how to actually comply with NatHERS, what you actually have to do to build a house that is actually going to perform to its rating. And that's where we've come out from, and we've seen a niche of information that's needed in the industry, and some sustainable builders got together, and we're all sharing things. It's not just me. I'm learning a lot from my passive house friends. Some of them are passive house, some of us are passive solar. And I take the position that you should always just grab information that is correct, that you like, that works, and put it together. So I don't have any strong position. I sort of the romantic in me sort of goes to the passive solar side. The perfectionist in me sort of heads towards the passive house of how they put things together. So there's a bit to learn there. Yeah. So anyway, that's what we're trying to do, is to broaden that information, because the last thing that we want is a system that of high performance that just falls in a heap because no one knows how to actually implement it in reality. And at the end of the day, it's the builders who actually make this stuff come off the paper and become 3D.
What I love about the collective of you is that there appears to be a great ability for you to all collaborate, that it's not, because I see that in the sustainable field, it can be a bit passive solar versus passive house. And for homeowners sitting on the outside, that can then feel a bit overwhelming, that they have to choose. And all of a sudden it sort of it feels too hard. And instead, with the group of the founding members, you have this fantastic ability to learn from each other and be able to still sit in where you want to work. And I see that the Sustainable Builders Alliance is actually going to be a platform that will bring that together from a technology and construction methodology and a knowledge point of view, that will mean that people don't have to feel like they have to choose. They can actually go there and see, okay, this is actually just about achieving a really fantastic home that's built beyond the codes, and that will give us the results that we feel that we're investing our money and we want to achieve, and present it in such an open and generous way that I think is just going to be amazing for, like, I can't wait till this website's live and this information's in a really accessible format, because there is so much knowledge on your social media, and yet and then like you said, in the podcast and in the web and the webinars, to be able to galvanize all of that together is just going to be really incredible.
Fingers crossed.
Well, Jeremy, I've taken up a lot of your time. I want to thank you so much for your generosity. You've just shared such fantastic information, great detail, and really actionable knowledge for the listening audience. It's really, really special to have you here again. And I'm super grateful for your time, your wisdom, and just everything that you do and how you show up in the industry to really improve it and improve the outcome for everyone involved. So thank you so much.
Lovely. Thank you, Amelia. Right back at you with all of that.